Hello and welcome to the Including Communities 2026 pre-recorded webinar. I'm Jackie Scott and I'm Chief Executive of Hampshire and Isle of Wight Community Foundation. We've decided to pre-record this webinar this year because there's a lot of information to digest, and we are going to hold a open question and answer session after Including Communities opens. So I hope you'll find this useful, and I'm going to gallop on now because, as I said, there's lots of content. So today I'm going to cover the criteria for Including Communities, general overview. I'm also going to focus on what the key changes are for this year because there are some significant changes. Going to focus on a couple of specific aspects of the criteria that we know community groups have struggled with understanding in the past. I'll give an overview refresher on exclusions. I'll explain why we're making the changes that we're making and the date for your diaries for the Q&A drop-in. So, Including Communities, this is our flagship funding program, and it attracts by far the most applications, by far from the widest area, by far the biggest amount of money that we give out in one single program a year, excluding one that's ring-fenced for the New Forest. So I'll give you an overview of Including Communities for this year, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. So the top things you need to know: the application window, it will open on our website on the 1st of September and close on the 28th of September. Then we go through the usual process of shortlisting and assessment and final decision making. And you'll learn, if you're shortlisted, you'll learn the outcome of your bid in early December. If you're not shortlisted, it will be in early to mid-October. Grant size is from 1 to 10,000 again. The length of the grant is for a 1-year period, and we would recommend that you assume it's for work starting in January 2027, because if you are successful, you won't receive the money until mid-December. Eligible geographies are our whole region as usual, but with some caveats, and I will go into the detail of that shortly. So that covers local authorities within Hampshire, also Portsmouth, also Southampton, and also the Isle of Wight. Target audiences, people facing poverty, social exclusion, discrimination, poor mental or physical health, barriers to employment, or other forms of disadvantage. There are no age restrictions for participants. Another area that of audience is people affected by crime or people who are at risk of committing crime, but we expect they're largely covered by those other criteria for the purpose of this fund. Just a reminder, this program is heavily oversubscribed. Last year, we received over £1 million worth of bids for £140,000 worth of funding approximately. So we really want you to carefully consider the criteria and your eligibility before you even consider applying. This is not a fund that we would necessarily recommend you put in a kind of speculative bid into. So last year, we only funded 12% of the bids that we received. So Including Communities supports our core aim of tackling poverty and inequality by helping to build flourishing communities. So activities that are funded through this program would expect to regularly bring people together, because we think that that's one of the key ways that you can help build stronger, safer communities. Now, there are 3 areas that all projects applying for Including Communities need to address, and that is irrespective of the theme that you're addressing. when you apply. So the issues that you need to address are: the project must be reaching people facing poverty or inequality, and you need to clearly explain how your project works with people who are in that situation, and that can include the list I provided earlier: financial barriers, social exclusion, discrimination, poor mental or physical health, barriers to employment, impacted by crime or at risk of committing crime. Your project must regularly bring people together. So when you're applying, you need to show us how the work brings people together on a regular basis, on a regular and ongoing basis, weekly or monthly, rather than short-term or one-off types of activity. So your project needs to also show how the lives of the people who take part in it, your participants or beneficiaries, how their lives will improve as a result of the project, as being part of the project. So will they improve their confidence? Will they feel safer? How is their life improving? Will it reduce antisocial behavior or offending? Will it build positive social networks? Will it improve physical mobility? Will it increase confidence or create new friendships? So you need to be able to show what the difference is that you're trying to achieve. You may have a fantastic project idea for chair yoga for older people, but you need to tell us what's the difference you want to make with that chair yoga project. The stronger applications would always show why the activity is needed, how the participants benefit from the activity. So that's all about the change, all about the way their lives will improve, and how the community or the people taking part have helped shape the proposed work. Now, that's really important and very difficult to express at times, but if you have an advisory committee that helps shape what your group's work does, or you might do regular surveys of participants, or you may have evidence from within the community that the particular type of work is needed. So we need to hear what that is so that we can see that you're engaged with and embedded in your local community, and that you're listening to what their needs are when you're shaping the work that you're delivering. And I'm very aware that that is much easier said than done. So I'm going to focus a little bit now on the key changes we're making this year, and I'll explain the reasons why a little later on. So there are two significant changes to the Including Communities program this year, and we really wanted to ensure that people were very clear on what they were before they apply, because it is quite a big change for what you may have become used to if you've applied for Including Communities before. So the first big change is around the geographic focus and how we are addressing that. And the second big change is on the thematic focus and how we want to hear you and what we want to hear you addressing. So I'm going to cover that separately in the next couple of slides. So firstly, the geographic focus. So as always, all of the geographies covered by Hampshire and Isle of Wight Community Foundation are eligible to apply. So if you're delivering work in Hampshire, any of the local authority areas that come under Hampshire County Council, or Portsmouth, or Southampton, or the Isle of Wight, you're eligible to apply for funding. And of course, smaller geographies within or across those areas are eligible to apply. So it doesn't have to fit within one of those four. It can be across them. It can be a smaller geography. But really importantly, we will be prioritizing projects that are supporting communities in areas that don't currently benefit from some of our dedicated place-based funding programs in Portsmouth, the New Forest, and the Isle of Wight. So if you're delivering work in any of those three areas, Portsmouth, the New Forest, or the Isle of Wight, your project will be eligible. You can apply, but it is less likely to be successful this year in Including Communities. So to give you a sense of how we would assess that, if we had an identical project from Southampton, an identical project in the New Forest, we are likely to fund the Southampton one and not fund the New Forest one. Now, of course, that example is ridiculous because no two projects are identical, but it's all about how we want to prioritize the geographical areas. I'll show you a slide a little later on that explains why we've made that decision this year. The other big change is the thematic focus. If you've applied for funding from the Community Foundation before, you'll understand that everything we fund comes under one of 6 themes. But recently, Including Communities has primarily focused on health and wellbeing interventions. And that's brilliant. We have been really glad to see so much work delivered that way. But this year, we also want to encourage bids that are focused on the themes of crime and safety and employability and skills. So we expect this year to have around about £140,000 available for Including Communities, if anything, slightly less. And we anticipate that we'll split that funding across these 3 themes in the following way. So firstly, just to give you a bit of an explanation as to what we mean for each of those themes. So the 2 new themes for this year are crime and safety and employability and skills. Crime and safety is activity that helps reduce the occurrence of crime or its impact. Employability and skills is work that supports disadvantaged people to build the skills. They might be technical skills, they could be life skills, but with an emphasis on improving their chances of employability. So across these 2 themes, the work might be youth work, it might be mentoring, peer support, confidence building, skills development, community work. This is not an exhaustive list. We want those ideas to come from you. It will be expected to be regular and sustained work, and there's no age requirements. There's no age requirements across any of Including Communities. So you can be working with young people, you can be working with older people. We're not worried about that. But those are the new themes that we want to see addressed this year. Approximately £80,000 to £100,000 worth of Including Communities funding will be allocated to crime and safety and employability and skills combined. And then again, health and wellbeing. So that's regular community activities that help reduce isolation, improve mental or physical wellbeing, and help people to develop supportive relationships and stronger connections within their communities. And again, no age requirements. And we're expecting to allocate around 40 to 60,000 across this theme. So just having covered the changes in terms of geography and theme, wanted to take the opportunity to focus on certain areas of the criteria. And these are issues that we know lots of groups have not felt clear enough about because we get lots of inquiries about them. And we don't like to be prescriptive, but I hope that this is understood to be guidance. So the main area on the criteria for Including Communities in the past that we know groups have struggled to be clear about is the terminology that we use around a regular and sustained intervention or regular and sustained activities. So we try not to be prescriptive, but in general, I think you can assume that this means that your activities need to be once a month or more frequently and for a year generally. Now, that will depend on your project, but we would normally expect at least a 6-month period of time. And depending on the kind of audience that you're working with, that 6 months might be different shapes, or that year might be in different shapes. It does need to be with the same cohort. So if it's a drop-in or something like that, it's unlikely that we would see it as being a sustained regular intervention. When we say the same cohort, we do understand that you'll never get your 6 or 12 people coming to every single session every month for 12 months. We recognize that. But the focus needs to be on the same group of people throughout the term of the project. So school holiday or similar less regular programs or interventions like drop-in sessions, as I mentioned, really need to work hard to show that they're addressing the issues that we want to address, like reducing isolation and so on. Because a less regular model is more difficult to make that argument for achieving those aims. And just a flag that we will prioritize in-person activities. Again, if you have something that is online based, you'll need to really work hard to show us that it's addressing those issues like reducing isolation, improving well-being, building safer communities, and so on. Another area of the criteria that I think it's worth a refresher on, and certainly for groups that haven't applied before, but we also know that groups that have applied before still struggle to understand what it is we're looking for when we talk about core criteria. So core criteria is the terminology we use for all of the kind of due diligence documentation that we require a community group to have for us to feel confident that we're able to fund them, that they're a well-governed organisation that we can fund. And every open grants program that you might apply to with Hampshire and Isle of Wight Community Foundation asks you to go through questionnaire, and that questionnaire is about addressing the core criteria. And at the end of making an application, you then have to demonstrate to us that what you've said in the questionnaire is correct by presenting evidence across these 6 key areas. So it's all about good governance, and what we have tried to pare back as being the least the least amount of information to be able to do the most appropriate due diligence and good governance checks for the organizations that we make grants to. So there's 6 things that we always check. We check your constitution. We read every constitution. We will check that you have a minimum of 3 trustees or directors or management committee members, depending on how you're constituted, who are unrelated and don't live at the same address. Often it's CICs who fall down at this hurdle because there's not the same requirements of them. And you can, as a CIC, have only 1 director, but we won't accept that. So we won't fund a CIC that has only 1 director. So that requirement is the same, even if you didn't set your CIC up with more than 1 director. We'll still require you to have 3. So you will miss that hurdle and be rejected at shortlisting if you don't have 3 directors as a CIC. And they do need to be unrelated, and they do need to live at a different address. And we'll triangulate that with your constitution as well. Make sure that your directors, management committee, and so on is matching the minimum of what you require in your constitution. We will ask for your most recent accounts. So that's primarily to get a sense of, are you robust enough, financially robust enough to fund? So what we're primarily looking at, although we will look at lots of other things on your accounts as well, but what we're primarily looking at financially is your reserves position, to assess whether or not, in the context of your organisation, that you don't have so much in reserve that you don't actually need the money, or on the other end of that spectrum, that you don't have so little in reserve that there's a risk you could close before the end of the project. So we are not prescriptive. We do not say you must have more than 3 and less than 6 months worth of reserves. We don't take that approach. We do look at it contextually, and you will find that it's something that we will often ask you questions about. If you have designated funds, we will expect to see the designation statement from your trustees. It can't just be something that members of staff or volunteers have sort of worked out between themselves. trustees or directors have to have agreed the designation statement, and we need to be clear about what that is doing with your reserves. And just a flag, if you have fixed assets like buildings, excuse me, we do recognise those as not being ready cash or ready money, so we would discount them when we're calculating what your reserves are. We will ask for a copy of your safeguarding policy. It must have a named safeguarding lead who is still employed by your organisation or still a volunteer or trustee. And the policy needs to detail what to do when a safeguarding issue arises. That's the bare minimum. A good safeguarding policy also gives the connections for the police and safeguarding board and so on. Your equalities policy, often named your equal opportunities policy or your EDI policy or something like that, needs to address not only your approach to equalities in employment scenarios, but also around your beneficiary group and your volunteers too. So we need to see an equalities policy that, again, that is contextual for your organisation. And we always need to see your bank account. And the reason for that is so that if you are successful, the grant we have for your grant, we can have a recent bank account on file. And it needs to be in the group's name and not an individual's name. And you are required to upload all of these documents when you apply, so make sure that you have them to hand. I want to give a quick refresher on exclusions, because there is some work that either the Community Foundation or this program does not fund. This program won't fund work that is one-to-one. So counselling, for example, isn't suitable for this program. It won't fund individual items of equipment worth over £1,000, and it won't fund capital works. So we wouldn't fund a bathroom, for example, or a new kitchen through this program. We won't fund organisations with an income over £1 million, and we also won't fund a branch of a national body. So you have to have your own constitution and you need to be local stroke regional. We won't and can't fund political campaigning, and we won't fund work that's proselytising for a particular religion or belief system. Organisations that are faith-based organisations are eligible to apply, but you do need to confirm that you're not proselytising. And we don't and can't fund statutory delivery. If you're a statutory body and the work you want to seek funding for is outside of your statutory requirements, it's worth having a conversation with us in advance. But again, all of the other requirements would match anyway. But all charitable structures are eligible to apply: CIOs, CICs, registered charities, constituted community groups, and so on. But again, you have to be a locally constituted organisation. So not a national branch of a national body. So I just want to cover why we're making the changes. So I mentioned that we are asking for bids specifically around crime and safety and employability and skills. And we are driven by data for this decision making. So if you look at the chart here, for the last couple of years, certainly health and wellbeing has dominated thematically for our funding. So this percentage is the percentage of the total funding that Hampshire and Isle of Wight Community Foundation has made in those 2 years. It's not just the funding for Including Communities. So health and wellbeing has been close to half of the funding that we have made. Everything golden thread is poverty and inequality. So that's all work with people who come from, poverty or disadvantaged situations. But health and wellbeing has been very, very dominant for the last couple of years. Poverty and inequality in 2024 was the second highest. Flourishing communities, which is broad, the kind of work that makes a community good to live in, was the second highest in 2025, and there's a reason for that, and that's to do with funding on the Isle of Wight for heritage projects. But you can see that employability and skills have both really received very little funding over the last couple of years. And employability and skills is actually a real strength area for us, and an area we know that our local community groups are really good at delivering on, because we had a really big employability and skills project a few years ago. But since funding for that project ended, we have struggled to provide the funding that we would like to on employability and skills. And through Including Communities, we're able to change that emphasis a little bit. And then, as you can see, crime and safety has had very, very little funding from us over the last couple of years and longer. And that's a real pity, because if you're a community affected by issues around crime and safety, it is a huge issue for you. It can be a daily worry. And so we really want to encourage applications from groups working within this thematic area this year. You'll also spot, of course, that the environment is our sixth theme, and it also receives very little funding, but we're not addressing that through Including Communities. And that's because of the origin of the funding from Including Communities doesn't really lend itself to being able to address the environment. And we're looking at that in a completely different way, possibly from next year. So that's why we're making those changes thematically. So we really would like to see some interesting work around employability and skills and crime and safety coming through for Including Communities this year. And again, geographic focuses. So if you know me, you know I'm a New Forest local. And so, it pains me to be saying that we won't prioritise bids from the New Forest, but there's a really good reason for it. We are very driven by the origination of the funding that we are distributing, and we have dedicated funding for place-based funding for the New Forest, for Portsmouth, and for the island. And the charts you're looking at are showing you the order of the order in which local areas are funded, percentage of funding. And the New Forest, Portsmouth, and the Isle of Wight have been our top three for the last 2 years. And top three to such an extent that last year, the next nearest, so the New Forest received 24% of our funding last year, in 2024, Portsmouth 22% of our funding, the Isle of Wight 18% of our funding. Now, that's all because of place-based funds that are ring-fenced for those areas, which is obviously fantastic for them. But then the next nearest area in 2024 was Southampton at just 11%. And Basingstoke and Deane came in at 9% in 2024. In 2025, very similar breakdown for those top three, but the next nearest was Basingstoke and Deane at 7%, and Southampton didn't even get to that level. So it's really important for us as a regional funder to be able to enable groups to apply who are from across the region, but also both rural and cities and so on. And so, we have a really diverse geography in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And we really want to be able to reflect that in our funding, and Including Communities, the structure of Including Communities enables us to do that. So it's not that we don't care about the New Forest, Portsmouth, or the Isle of Wight. In fact, we love all of those areas and have significant place-based funds available for them. And so what we want to do is kind of open a gate a little bit more for groups operating in other areas. So I hope that's clear and that you can understand why we're making that change for Including Communities this year. So we're going to have a drop-in session after the funding opens on our website, so that you can have a little bit of time with understanding the criteria, thinking it through, and starting your bids. before you have the chance to do the open Q&A with us. It will be a drop-in at any time session, so we will have the Zoom meeting open for that hour and a half, but we will ask you to register in advance, and there'll be a link up on our website shortly for that, and that will be on the Including Communities page of our grants information. So the date to pop in your diaries is Tuesday, the 8th of September, from 1:30 until 3 p.m. We'd really encourage you to come. We've found when we've run open Q&As in the past that actually lots of people arrive at the beginning and keep on the call for the whole length of the call, even though they've already had their own question answered, because actually there's a lot of information that somebody else asking that question might be something that you didn't even think of. So I would encourage you to sign up for the Q&A drop-in session. But of course, we want to be here to answer any of your questions anyway. If you do need help, call the office number, and either Catherine or myself should be able to help you, or you can always email us. Catherine's email is grantsadmin@hiwcf.com, and mine is ceo@hiwcf.com. I hope that's been really helpful for you today. Please do get in touch if you're not clear about anything. I would encourage you to watch and rewatch this, read the criteria, which will be up on the website at the same time as this video's up, and then join us for the Q&A. And we really hope that we'll be able to cover off most of your queries through those means. Good luck with your bids.